Hello everyone. In this lecture we're going to talk about user creation, two different ways that we would go about creating a user. There's more, but there's two that I'm going to focus on. And then we're going to talk about user profiles. So first, let's talk about creating a user. There's one way that most people learn how to create users, and that is to go down to Start menu and then click on Settings and go to the Accounts area. In the Accounts area we have Family and Other People. This also allows you to add someone else to this PC. So if you want to do that this way, you can navigate here, click on Add Someone Else to this PC. Now Microsoft is going to try and make you log in using some Microsoft account. If you do this, if you have a Microsoft account, you can type the email that's associated with that account here, and it will then pull information from Microsoft servers. It'd have the username, it may have a password that you use, it may have an email account with email and then set it up on the local machine, depending on what account you have. If you don't want to do that, you can say, I don't have this person's sign-in information, and then it's going to go to the next screen where it's going to try and make you sign up. It really wants you to sign up and let Microsoft have all your information. If you don't want to give Microsoft all your information, you can add a user without Microsoft. So, okay, finally, three clicks later, we can now create a user that's not for Microsoft. So let's create a user called Phil, give him a password, and the password hint is going to be Phil's password. Oops, except I can't type. This is actually a good thing. If I tried to type in Phil's password, I used password as the password here because I'm all about security. If I click next, it's going to say no, your password hint can't contain your password. So I can't just type in my password here. I have to have some other word. So I'll just do that. I'll shorten it. Okay, and then now I have Phil as a local account. So this is one of the ways that you can create a user. This also allows you to create a user with a Microsoft account. If you don't want to do that, and you don't want to have to constantly wait for the Microsoft thing and click through it, there is another way to do this. And this is the way I prefer to create accounts, and I'll show you why. If you right click and go back up to Computer Management, remember the local users and groups. Okay, so here, if we go to our users folder, you notice Phil is now a user here. I can simply right click anywhere in this blank area and select New User. This brings up a much smaller, much easier window where I can give the user a name. So let's give the user name Sheila. And we'll say Sheila's password never expires. We won't give her one for right now. And create. Bam, that was it. You don't see her yet. Once I finished, I can hit close and then she'll show up. If I had more users, I could keep typing in a bunch of users here. Much faster, much less button clicks than going through the old way. And Microsoft isn't trying to make me create an account every time I try. So close, and then now Sheila has shown up too. Okay, so now let's say I want to add, maybe Phil is going to be an administrator. So if I want Phil to be an administrator, I can add him to that group in two different ways. I can double click on Phil's user here, and this will give me some basic information about Phil's user account, including his membership. The member of profile folder tab, member of tab gives me a list of all the groups that he's a member of. Right now, he's just a member of the users group. They are all members of the users group. So I can add a group. I have to know the name of the group to do this. Administrators with a Z, with an S. Check the name, it finds it, and then okay. And he'd be part of the administrators group if I hit apply. Now that's one way to do it. The other way to do it, let me remove it so I can show you. The other way to add him to the administrators group is to go to groups, double click on administrators, and then add, like I was showing you last week. And then I just have to know the name of the user. And I click OK, and now Phil is a member of the administrators group. Okay, Phil is now an administrator. Sheila is not yet. Okay, so those are two different ways to create users. You can tell obviously that I prefer this way because not only have I told you, but you can just see how much faster it'll be once you know what you want to add. Now getting back into the user properties here. We've got the general properties, which are mostly passwords and information like their full name and a description of the user. Member of telling us what groups they're members of, and then the profile tab. The profile tab is specific information about a user's profile. Now, a user's profile is a specific place on the computer that is created when the user logs in. Let's go to it right now. Let me close this out. If I go down to the machine, to File Explorer, to the C drive, and the users folder. Inside the users folder are where all the profiles are. Now, going back into the users properties here, we have 3 tabs. We have the general tab where you can make changes to the user's password information, whether they're can or cannot change the password, whether it expires or not. Also, if the account is enabled or disabled, or if the account is locked out. If there are some settings, security settings on your system that say after 3 failed attempts to log in, your profile, you get locked out. Your user gets locked out. This box will be checked. And then if I needed it unlocked, I would have to go to administrator and say, hey, can you log in and unlock my account? This is what you would do. You would go to their properties window, and you would see that their account is locked, and you would uncheck that box. That's how you unlock an account. So that's what you would cover in the general tab. In the member of tab, as you saw, this is where any groups that I'm a member of, they're going to show up here. Now the profile tab, this has information about the profile. A user's profile is a folder that contains configuration information, user-specific system and application configuration information. This is basically what makes up your account. So there is a default path, a default setting and everything for the user profile. So these are all blank. If for whatever reason I was changing where these profiles were kept, I would have to have them configured here. So normally, by default, let me close this out, they are located in the users folder. So if I go to the C drive and then go to the users folder, this is where all of the profiles are kept, the profile folders are kept. Now, you will notice that there is no Phil or Sheila folder because these folders are not created until the user logs in. When the user logs in for the first time, it creates a new profile. It creates a new profile by copying this hidden default profile folder. So you can see that I have show hidden files enabled, and you can see that this is slightly more transparent than the others. This is a hidden folder. It's always there. So this default folder, when I log in, so if I were to log in as Phil, in fact, let me do that right now. I'm going to log in as Phil, and what it's going to do, it's going to take this default folder, it's going to copy everything, and it's going to create a new folder called Phil with all the information all the permissions, I should say, that will allow Phil to access that folder. So here, let me log out. And then if I go to sign in, notice I've got more users now. I've got Phil and Sheila as well. So let's log in as Phil. And then it's going to take a couple minutes, so I'm going to pause while it tries to set up and force Cortana down my throat, and I'll be right back. Okay, here we are. So let's go take a look at Phil's profile. So go into our users folder, and now, hey, Phil is here. We have logged in as Phil. It created a new account. Notice I have the hidden files not set to view, so we don't see that default folder. If I turn on hidden items, and now you can see the default folder is there. So if I open up Phil's folder, this is what you're going to see if you have hidden files shown on any new profile. You're going to see these are the folders that are going to be there. They're all empty at this point because I haven't done anything yet. You're going to have a hidden folder called app data, and then you're going to have a hidden file called ntuser.dat. This file here, ntuser.dat, that is the user-specific configuration. That is going to have information like what background do I see here? What is the theme that I'm logging in as? Things like that. So this is computer-specific, user-specific information, configuration. If I change this, if I were to change my background, once I log out, it would write the changes that I made to my ntuser.dat file, and then next time I logged in, it would remember what I had changed my background image, for example, to, and it would pull up the proper one. App data is application-specific user data. So there's a number of different ways that we can access applications, local low, which we won't worry about now, and roaming if you are a remote user, for example. So local, this is going to have folders for all of the different types, all the different applications, manufacturers, things like that. Right now, there's not going to be any information in here because Phil has just been created. He hasn't done anything yet. But if I, for example, was using Internet Explorer, there would be a number of specific Internet Explorer settings that will be stored in here. And then when I open up Internet Explorer the next time, all the setting changes that I made would stay the same. They would stay in here. And these settings are more like the tabs that I have, or if I have specific configurations of shortcuts on the screen or things like that. The actual shortcuts themselves, though, are going to be stored. Let me get back over here to Phil. Oop, and it just changed the way it looked. But the actual shortcuts are going to be stored in links and favorites. This is going to be places you visit a lot. These are going to be the bookmarks that you've created. Downloads that you've gotten off the internet, places that you'll store documents by default, and so on. So these are all pretty much straightforward folder names that tell you what is stored in there. Every user is going to have these. Now, this user profile, if this is creating the whole user experience, if you wanted to move Phil, maybe we got a new computer and Phil is going to take the new computer. And so we want to take all his stuff, all of his documents, all of his settings, everything, copy it over to the other computer so everything looks exactly the same as it did on his old computer. We could do that, but you can't just do a straight copy. I can't just put in a thumb drive, copy everything, and then throw it on the other machine. And this is because the permissions, which we were talking about last week, the NTFS permissions, will be different on this computer versus the other computer, because this computer has a different folder structure. It has a different local disk C. So these will not match up. The permissions that have been written for all of these folders will not match the new computer because it's a different folder and a different computer. So in order to do that, we can do it, and it's actually a very common thing to move someone's profile, but that usually requires something like using sysprep to generalize the system and generalize the folder before you can then install the new system and then pull up the new profile, and then the new system will write all its information to that profile. So you can move them around, but it's not just as simple as copying stuff over. You'll need to actually do a little pre-processing work to make that happen. Okay. So one other thing I want to talk about here with this, with the user profile, is the idea of a mandatory profile. Now, a mandatory profile is a profile that, as it sounds, is mandatory. You're not able to change it. Specifically, if I make changes, say I want to change Phil's profile to mandatory, it would mean that if Phil made any changes to his profile, when he logged back into his machine the next day, everything would revert to whatever the mandatory profile said. Now, to do that, all we have to do is change his ntuser.dat file to an ntuser.man file. Now, I can't do this now because I'm in, I'm actually in Phil's account right now, and so this is in use. I can't make a change until I log out. But if I wanted to set it so he wouldn't be able to make changes, all I have to do is change the ntuser to .dat to .man for mandatory. Okay? So that is an option. That's something that gets used a lot in corporate environments where they want everything to look the same. Now, getting back to our user information here, local users and groups. I had mentioned that we could change the location of a user profile. A lot of times, if you're doing this, you're actually storing the user profile on some network server somewhere else other than the local machines. The idea behind this is called roaming profiles. The idea behind roaming profiles is that users can sit down at any machine they want and log in with their user login, and it will copy all that information to the computer, and they will have their same profile on any machine anywhere in the building. And so that's pretty convenient. Now, the downside is it's really slow. So you can imagine if you had to copy, maybe it's a new user, it's not a big deal, but if you have a lot of files, if you've been working and your documents folder is full of all sorts of Excel spreadsheets and Word documents, it could take a long time to copy over all that stuff to a computer every time you were to log into a different machine. That's not efficient at all. The convenience is there because it doesn't matter where you are. You can just log into a computer. But it takes up a lot of network resources and it's pretty slow. The other problem with that is if anything happens, if anything goes bad on the server, which happens occasionally, you have what's called a corrupt profile. And so a user sits down, tries to log in, and then it downloads a corrupt profile, and now they can't log in. And now you have to go and find some backup from the server, which may be out of date, maybe a couple days old, and the user may lose some work that they have been working on and saving, because something happened at the server level. So in general, we try to stay away from roaming profiles, but I have had to implement them in companies before because that was really the best solution for what they needed. So roaming profiles, this is where you would select the profile path, the network drive that it's going to go to, and to pull the information rather than just going to the local machine. Now, the better solution in general, what we consider a better solution, is rather than just changing the entire profile location, is to change specific folder locations. What this does is we can put the folder in one specific place, but rather than copying it to the local drive every time you log into a new system, it just looks somewhere on the network for your profile and your data rather than copying the entire data. Now, to do that, that's something called folder redirection, and that's done at the folder level. And even more specifically at the shortcut level. So here if I go back into Phil's profile, these are not actually folders. These are shortcuts. They're called empty folders, but they're really pointing somewhere else. So for example, if I open up the desktop folder, this desktop folder is empty. This desktop folder is actually the desktop right here. So if I were to create a new file, let's create a new text file here in the desktop folder, it's going to appear here on the actual desktop. So this is the same file. They're both pointing to the same file, but they're in two different places. One is actually the desktop, one is here in this folder here in Phil's profile. If I wanted his desktop folder to be somewhere else, if I right click on the desktop and go to properties, I have the option of changing the location of where the folder is. So right now it's actually set to C users Phil desktop. So this is the actual location. I can change this. I can say I want you to go to a server drive somewhere out on our network, and that's where the desktop folder is going to be located. And that's true for all of these folders. If I go to their properties, I can check their actual location, and we can change where they are. This is folder redirection. So basically, I go to this folder then goes somewhere else to find the actual data. And that is an easier, more efficient, I don't want to say it's easier, but it's a more efficient way of handling the roaming profile idea, because we're not copying all this data across the network every time you log in. We're only accessing data over the network. And so the amount of network traffic we're using is much less, and we're not copying things nearly as much, meaning the chance of things getting corrupted is also much less, because we're not copying and saving things multiple times, which is when corruption could occur. So that is folder redirection. Now, one last thing I want to talk about is the idea of this public profile that we have. The public profile is designed to share folders or files to all of the profiles on the machine, but it doesn't share them in the same way as folder redirection does. It's not like going somewhere and grabbing them. It's not putting them somewhere where everyone can come in and take them from the network. This is something that actually redirects specific folders called libraries. Now, in Windows 7 and Windows 8, libraries were just over here on the left side in the pane that you'd be able to access at any time. Well, that's changed in newer versions of Windows 10. You can't just get at them this way. You have to do a good amount to make this happen. But it's worth it, because this is an important feature that you may encounter out in the wild. You may see this and want to know, well, how did they do this? Well, this is how they did it. So first of all, what am I talking about? Let's say I have a documents folder, my public profile, and the documents folder is empty. So I'm going to create a file, and I'm going to call it public file. And this is a text file that I want everyone to be able to access through their libraries. Well, if I want them to be able to access it through their libraries, I have to do two things. One, I have to enable libraries. So to be able to see the libraries here, I need to click on the View tab, and then in the navigation pane, because that's what this is, the navigation pane, if I click this, I can say Show Libraries. And then this will include the libraries now, which are folders that contain other folders or point to other folders. They don't actually store them, but there are ways you can access them. So if I were to go into my documents, any files that were in my documents folder as well as in the public documents folder will show here, except not yet, because by default Windows 10 doesn't show the public profile documents folder. Why? I'm not really sure, because that was the whole point of it when they first brought it out in Windows 7 in this manner, was to be able to share it with the libraries, and then they didn't do it. So in order to do this, we actually have to do one more thing. We need to manually include that folder in the libraries. So let's go back. Let's work our way back to our public documents folder. If I right-click on the public documents folder, one of the options is include in library, and I will include my public documents folder in the documents library. So if I click on that, now if I look in documents, hey, look, there's a public documents folder. So if I go to my documents library, that public file has now shown up because it is in the public profile. So anybody on this machine has access to the public documents folder in their documents library now. Okay, so that is not quite the same as what you were seeing in the book. I wanted to point that out, and this is true for all of the files in the public documents in the public profile. All of these folders, you can use them. They will show up in libraries as long as you specifically add them. Right click and then add them, and then which library do you want to put them in. The reason Windows 10 is doing this is they're also allowing you to create your own custom libraries. You can create a specific library that has your folders in it, just your folders, maybe not even these public folders. So basically to give you a shortcut to access your most often used folders. Okay, so that is public profile. Matter of fact, that is pretty much it for profiles in general. So just to recap, the users folder is where the local profiles are stored. Every time you first log in to the machine, it will create a new profile based on the default profile. It'll copy the default profile over and set up permissions for the new user. You can set these profiles as mandatory by changing the ntuser.dat file to the ntuser.man file, but you can't be logged in when you do it. You have to do it from a different user. Generally, the administrator user will do that kind of thing. We have the ability to have what's called a roaming profile, which is where we can copy information from a server onto a local machine every time we log into to a new machine to keep your profile following you. Or we can use folder redirection, which doesn't take nearly as long and doesn't do as much copying, so has less chance of corruption. And then finally, we have the public profile, which allows us to store data in the public folder that any user on the machine is able to access. So that's it for profiles and for user creation. We're going to have one more short video that is going to discuss the different ways we can authenticate using advanced authentication methods, including networking.